Every time a clergy person starts newly in a parish, it is a new beginning. But the context that we're living in right now seems to me to give special poignancy to new beginnings. We are being called again to pastoral care, taking all the lessons taught by a global pandemic with us. We are being called again to justice, particularly for racialized minorities, as we grapple with the lessons taught by residential schools and the legacy of settler colonialism. We're being called again to engage sustainably with creation as human-caused climate changes wreak havoc on our physical, our mental health, our economy, our safety, and our security. The time is ripe for mature and confident Christian witness as we offer comfort to those suffering in our current circumstances and work to transform the world according to God's dream for all of us. The opportunities before the church right now are immense and quite overwhelming, but they're also very precious, I think, and life-giving. The temptations towards cynicism and apathy are great, coming out of an election, but the Christian church continues to be here to offer hope and the possibility of new life and new creation. Now that might be all a bit much to lay on poor Marnie's shoulders as she begins her ministry here among you. No one priest, no one church for that matter, can be all things to all people. This new beginning is also a time of discernment for all of you. Where do your ministries match up? What will you and Marnie be good at together right away? Where will Marnie's gifts and skills present a challenge to the congregation here, asking you all to stretch and grow? And where will the congregation's gifts and skills push Marnie to a place where she will have to stretch and grow? I mean, you may have some ideas, some preliminary answers to those questions already, but the next few months are really a time to dig into these questions, to get to know one another more deeply or more intimately, learn each other's dreams, learn each other's no-go zones. It's going to be fun. I know from experience that getting to know Marnie is a really fun thing to do. We are celebrating the feast of St. Matthew today. Matthew, as you know, is the author of the Gospel, Matthew the Apostle, Matthew the tax collector. Matthew the tax collector was definitely an outcast in ancient Jewish society, the kind of person well-bred people didn't spend any time with. He was polluted by his job and was not always welcome to participate in worship. He probably wouldn't be here tonight, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, you know a lot of this. I don't think Matthew is that much of a stranger to us. The story today, a very familiar one, the calling of Matthew. Jesus encounters Matthew hard at work in his kiosk. Has anybody ever worked in a kiosk? I used to work in a kiosk in Whistler. It's very small, very confining. There's no escape from the people. Jesus encounters Matthew there and says, "Follow me." And as the story goes, Matthew got up and followed him. But then the story seems peculiar to me because it seems that Jesus actually follows Matthew. It seems in the story that Jesus and his disciples follow Matthew to his house, his place of work, where they encounter other tax collectors and sinners, and then they sit down and eat with them. This is a very important thing to notice, I think, that when Jesus asks you to follow him, he may end up following you into your home, following you into your job, following you into your regular, everyday life. Because, and I think this is so important, Jesus wants to meet you where you are. Jesus wants to get to know you, to know how you live, to know what you do, what you like, who you hang out with. And Jesus isn't doing that to judge you or to correct you. I don't think anywhere in the Gospel of Matthew does Jesus correct or criticize or upbraid the tax collectors and the sinners. I mean, he takes on the Pharisees and the scribes every so often, but mostly when they act like, snooty, know-it-all jerks. Do you know who else likes to take on snooty know-it-all jerks? It's Marnie. All I'm saying is that when Jesus has dinner with tax collectors and sinners, he has no other motive than to hang out with them and to be companionable. Do you know who else is really good at hanging out and being companionable? It's Marnie. And I'm making a bit light of all this, but there is a serious lesson to learn here for those of us who grew up in the colonial church. The colonial church. The colonial church had a mission. And that mission was to fix everyone. And the colonial church did a pretty horrible job trying to fix everyone. That's probably not a strong enough way to say it. In its efforts to fix people, to correct them and cure them, to save them and set them on the right path, the colonial church perpetrated evil. The colonial church became the snooty know-it-all jerks that Jesus took pains to criticize. And the phrase snooty know-it-all jerks doesn't quite describe it harshly enough. The know-it-allism that happened in the colonial church took a very dangerous and a murderous kind of a turn. Imagine all that effort moving around the world with a false sense of righteousness and military might. The colonial church would have put Matthew the tax collector in jail and might even have had him executed because he was so tainted by the job that he had. The colonial church had no time for sitting down and getting to know people over dinner. It was too busy trying to fix them. But friends, let's not make that mistake again. So many of our churches make the mistake of spending all their time wondering how to draw people in, rather than heading out into the world to meet people where they live. So often we waste time waiting for people to come to us rather than going to them. The lesson from today's gospel reading is that we never follow Jesus into the church or into the synagogue or into the temple. I mean, remember what Jesus did when he went into the temple. We always follow Jesus into our everyday lives. And if we want to embody Jesus' ministry, we should not ask people to follow us into the church. That's simply not what he did. Instead, he followed them into their lives. And this is what we must do too. We must meet people where they're at. Ask them how they're doing. And then shut up and listen. There's a great benefit in learning the spiritual practice of shutting up and listening. What a beautiful place the world would be if more people engaged in the spiritual practice of shutting up and listening. My spouse told me that I shouldn't say shutting up in the sermon. As you know, Matthew was not only a tax collector, he was also an apostle and an evangelist, and he was able to be those things, to take on those new identities, because Jesus took the time to sit down and eat with him and his friends, to get to know him, and then to include him in decision-making and leadership. Despite, or maybe even because of his impurity and his vulnerability, Jesus brought Matthew the outcast into the very center of his ministry here on earth. May we learn to do the same with all the vulnerable people we encounter. Through Jesus Christ, who is our friend and our helper. Amen.
Amen.